What would you do if you saw someone having a heart attack right in front of you? You'd help them, right? Or at least get out of the way so someone else could help. Well, what you're about to hear will make you lose all faith in humanity, or at least in one racist cop who valued his prejudice more than a human life. This is the story of how Officer Daniel Patterson's racism literally killed someone, destroyed his entire life, and triggered the largest medical malpractice lawsuit in state history. And the kicker? The black doctor he arrested while trying to save a life is about to own everything Patterson ever had or ever will have. It was 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon at Riverside Plaza, an upscale shopping center in the heart of downtown. The lunch crowd was thinning out when suddenly a scream pierced the air. Harold Morrison, a 67-year-old retired teacher, had collapsed near the fountain, clutching his chest, his face contorted in agony. His wife, Barbara, was screaming for help as her husband of 42 years gasped for breath on the cold marble floor. Dr. Michael Washington was walking out of the medical conference at the Hilton across the street when he heard the commotion. At 38 years old, he was one of the youngest chief cardiac surgeons in the country, with credentials from Johns Hopkins, a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic, and over 500 successful heart surgeries under his belt. He had just finished presenting a groundbreaking paper on emergency cardiac intervention when fate put him exactly where he needed to be. Without hesitation, Dr. Washington sprinted toward the crowd gathering around Harold. His designer suit and conference badge flying as he ran, he pushed through the onlookers, his trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. Harold was in cardiac arrest, his lips turning blue, his breathing shallow and erratic. Every second counted. "I'm a doctor. Everyone, please step back," Dr. Washington commanded with the authority that came from years of managing emergency rooms. He dropped to his knees beside Harold, his fingers immediately finding the carotid artery. Weak, thready pulse. This man had minutes, maybe less. "Someone call 911 and tell them we have a cardiac arrest in progress," he shouted while loosening Harold's collar. "Tell them we need the defibrillator immediately. And find me an AED, automated external defibrillator. Check the stores." Barbara Morrison looked at him through her tears. "Please, save him. Please. He's all I have." "I'm going to do everything I can, ma'am," Dr. Washington said, already beginning chest compressions with the precise rhythm and depth that could mean the difference between life and death. "What's his name?" "Harold," she sobbed. "Harold Morrison." "Harold, you stay with me," Dr. Washington said loudly, performing compressions while monitoring Harold's vitals. His hands moved with practiced precision. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, check for pulse, repeat. The crowd watched in awe as this well-dressed black man worked with the focused intensity of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. That's when Officer Daniel Patterson arrived on scene. 23 years on the force, Patterson was known among the black community as someone to avoid. He had a reputation for finding any excuse to harass black citizens, especially those he thought were acting above their station. When he saw a black man kneeling over a white man on the ground, his racist mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. "Step away from him," Patterson shouted, his hand already on his weapon. Dr. Washington didn't even look up, his concentration entirely on counting compressions. "I'm a doctor. This man is in cardiac arrest. I need to continue CPR or he'll die." But Patterson didn't hear doctor. His prejudiced brain couldn't process that information. All he saw was a black man with his hands on a white man who appeared to be unconscious. In his warped worldview, this could only mean one thing. "I said step away now," Patterson commanded, moving closer. Barbara Morrison, horrified, tried to intervene. "Officer, no! He's helping. He's a doctor. My husband is dying." Patterson ignored her, his focus entirely on Dr. Washington. This is your last warning. Get your hands off him." Dr. Washington was at compression 25 of 30. Stopping now could be fatal. "Officer, I'm Dr. Michael Washington, Chief of Cardiac Surgery at St. Mary's Hospital. This man is in cardiac arrest. If I stop compressions, he will die. Please let me work." "I don't care who you claim to be," Patterson snarled. "You're assaulting this man." The crowd was growing agitated. Several people were recording, shouting at Patterson to leave the doctor alone. A teenager had found an AED from a nearby store and was running back with it. Time was running out for Harold Morrison. Dr. Washington completed his 30 compressions and quickly gave 2 rescue breaths. As he checked for a pulse, he looked up at Patterson with desperation. "Officer, I'm begging you. This man has maybe 2 minutes. Let me use the AED. I can save him." Patterson had made up his mind. In his 23 years, he had seen it all, and his racist instincts told him this black man was up to something. Maybe robbery, maybe assault, maybe some scam. He reached for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for assault and refusing to comply with lawful orders," Patterson declared. The crowd erupted in protests. "He's saving his life. Are you insane? Let the doctor work." Barbara Morrison was hysterical. "Please, he's helping. My husband is dying. Let him help." But Patterson was beyond reasoning. He grabbed Dr. Washington's arm, trying to pull him away from Harold. Dr. Washington resisted, trying to continue compressions with one hand while Patterson pulled at him. "Officer, you're killing this man," Dr. Washington shouted. "I need to attach the AED. He's in VFib. Please." The struggle was captured from multiple angles by horrified onlookers. Dr. Washington trying desperately to save a life while a police officer physically prevented him from doing so. It was surreal, nightmarish, and about to get much worse. Patterson, frustrated by the resistance, pulled out his taser. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting. I'm trying to save a life," Dr. Washington pleaded. But it was too late. The taser hit Dr. Washington in the back, 50,000 volts coursing through his body. He convulsed and fell forward, his body going rigid before collapsing next to Harold. The AED fell from the teenager's hands, clattering uselessly on the ground. For 30 seconds, no one moved, too shocked by what they had just witnessed. Then, Barbara Morrison let out a wail that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. She threw herself over her husband's still form, checking for a pulse for any sign of life. There was none. Harold Morrison was dead. Patterson, still operating on racist adrenaline, handcuffed the semi-conscious Dr. Washington, who was still recovering from being tased. "You have the right to remain silent." "You killed him," someone in the crowd said, their voice cutting through the chaos. "That doctor was saving him, and you killed him." The words seemed to penetrate Patterson's bubble. He looked down at Harold Morrison's still form, at Barbara sobbing over her husband's body, at the AED lying unused on the ground. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. The ambulance arrived 3 minutes later. The paramedics took one look at the scene. A prominent cardiac surgeon in handcuffs, a dead patient on the ground, an unused AED, and a crowd of witnesses all recording, and immediately understood what had happened. Dr. Washington, one of the paramedics, James Chen, recognized him immediately. What happened here?" Dr. Washington, his voice hoarse from the taser, managed to speak. "Cardiac arrest. I was performing CPR. The officer stopped me. The patient, is he?" James checked Harold's vitals, though he already knew the answer. He looked at his partner, then at Patterson, his face a mask of professional control hiding absolute fury. Time of death, 2:47 p.m. The second paramedic, Maria Rodriguez, who had worked with Dr. Washington before, couldn't contain herself. "Officer, do you have any idea what you've done?" Dr. Washington is the best cardiac surgeon in the state. He could have saved this man." Patterson's face was beginning to pale as the reality set in. I thought he was attacking. Attacking? Maria's voice rose. He was performing CPR. We can see the compression marks. The AED is right there. You just caused this man's death. The crowd was growing larger, angrier. Someone shouted, "Murderer!" Another voice called out, "Racist killer!" The videos were already being uploaded, shared, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Dr. Washington, still in handcuffs, looked at Harold Morrison's body with tears in his eyes. "I could have saved him," he whispered. "I was so close. If I'd had just 2 more minutes." Barbara Morrison approached Dr. Washington, her face streaked with tears. "You tried," she said, her voice breaking. "You tried to save my Harold, and this monster stopped you." She turned to Patterson with a look of pure hatred. "You murdered my husband. His blood is on your hands." Patterson tried to maintain his authority, but his voice was shaking. "Ma'am, I was following procedure." "Procedure?" Barbara's voice cracked. "What procedure says to stop a doctor from saving a life? What procedure says to tase someone performing CPR? You saw a black man and assumed he was a criminal. Your racism killed my husband." The paramedics were loading Harold's body onto a stretcher, covering him with a sheet. The finality of it, the white sheet over the man who had been alive just minutes ago, sent a fresh wave of grief through Barbara and horror through the crowd. "We need to take Dr. Washington to the hospital," James Chen said firmly. "He needs to be examined after being tased. An officer, you need to uncuff him. Now." Patterson hesitated, his training warring with the growing realization of what he had done. "He's under arrest? For what?" Maria demanded. "For trying to save a life? For being a doctor while black? Uncuff him now, or we're calling your supervisor." The crowd was recording everything, dozens of phones capturing Patterson's indecision, Dr. Washington's dignity even in handcuffs, and Barbara Morrison's devastating grief. This wasn't going away. This was going to explode. Patterson finally uncuffed Dr. Washington, his hands shaking as he did so. As the cuffs came off, Dr. Washington rubbed his wrists, the marks clearly visible against his dark skin. He looked at Patterson with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Officer Patterson," Dr. Washington said, his voice steady despite everything, "I want you to know that Harold Morrison would be alive right now if not for your actions. You didn't just fail in your duty to protect and serve, you actively caused a death. And I promise you there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" Patterson asked, trying to regain some control. "No," Dr. Washington replied. "I'm promising you justice. For Harold, for Barbara, and for every black person you've terrorized with your badge and your prejudice. Your career, your freedom, your entire life. It all ended the moment you pulled that taser. You just don't know it yet." As Dr. Washington was helped into the ambulance for examination, the crowd parted respectfully. Several people reached out to touch his shoulder, to thank him for trying. He had become, in that moment, both a hero and a victim, a symbol of excellence confronting ignorance, of competence facing racism, of life battling against death and losing not to nature but to hatred. The last thing Patterson heard before the ambulance doors closed was Dr. Washington's voice, clear and determined. "Contact my attorney, David Lieberman. Tell him everything. Tell him we're going to change the system, starting with Officer Patterson." The videos hit social media before the ambulance even left the scene. Within minutes, #KillerCop and #Doctor Arrested were trending nationwide. The footage was beyond damning. It showed Dr. Washington clearly identifying himself as a doctor, performing textbook CPR, begging to save Harold's life, and Officer Patterson tasing him and causing the patient's death. But what happened next would become the most catastrophic legal and personal destruction of a police officer in American history. At the police station, Officer Patterson sat in the break room, his hands still shaking, trying to write his report. But how could he write this? How could he justify tasing a doctor performing CPR? His phone was buzzing nonstop. Texts from other officers who had seen the videos, calls from the union rep, and one ominous message from the chief. My office, now. Chief Robert McKenna was watching the videos when Patterson walked in. The chief's face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his temple. He let the video play to the end, the part where Barbara Morrison called Patterson a murderer, before speaking. 23 years, Chief McKenna said, his voice dangerously quiet. 23 years on the force, and you arrest a doctor performing CPR? You tase him? A man dies because of your actions? Patterson tried to defend himself. Chief, I thought he was assaulting the victim. He didn't look like a doctor. He was what? Patterson? The chief interrupted. Black? Is that what you were going to say? Because Dr. Michael Washington is one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. He's saved hundreds of lives, including my wife's brother last year. And you tased him while he was trying to save someone? The blood drained from Patterson's face. Your wife's brother? Yes, Patterson. Dr. Washington performed a triple bypass on him, saved his life. And today you prevented him from saving Harold Morrison's life. The mayor's office has already called. The governor's office has called. The Department of Justice has called. Do you understand what you've done? Before Patterson could answer, the door burst open. David Lieberman, Dr. Washington's attorney and one of the top civil rights lawyers in the country, walked in with two other lawyers. Chief McKenna, Lieberman said, his voice cold and professional. I'm here to inform you that we're filing criminal charges against Officer Patterson for involuntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, violation of civil rights, and criminal negligence resulting in death. We're also filing a $50 million civil suit against Officer Patterson and the department. $50 million? Patterson gasped. That's just the start, Lieberman continued. Dr. Washington was prevented from saving a life because of his race. The trauma of watching a patient die while being tased and arrested is incalculable. But more importantly, this is about systemic change. Officer Patterson's record shows 38 complaints from black citizens over his career, all dismissed or buried. This ends now. Chief McKenna looked at Patterson with disgust. You're suspended immediately, without pay, pending investigation. Badge and gun on my desk, now. Patterson's hands trembled as he unclipped his badge, the piece of metal that had defined him for over 2 decades. His service weapon followed, placed carefully on the chief's desk. Without them, he felt naked, vulnerable, like a crucial part of his identity had been stripped away. Meanwhile, at St. Mary's Hospital, Dr. Washington was being examined. The taser had left burn marks on his back, and he was experiencing muscle spasms and heart palpitations, common after effects of being tased. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological trauma. I could have saved him, doctor, Washington told his colleague, Dr. Jennifer Park, who was treating him. I had him. If I'd had 2 more minutes with the AED, Harold Morrison would be alive. This isn't your fault, Michael, doctor, Park said, her voice full of anger. That racist cop killed Harold Morrison, not you. The medical community's response was swift and furious. Within hours, the American Medical Association released a statement condemning the arrest. The American College of Cardiology demanded Patterson's immediate prosecution. Every major hospital in the state announced they were reviewing their protocols for protecting medical professionals providing emergency care. Dr. Washington's colleagues at St. Marys were particularly outraged. Dr. James Roberts, the chief of staff, called a press conference that evening. Dr. Michael Washington is not just a colleague, he's a hero, doctor, Roberts said, his voice shaking with emotion. He has performed over 500 successful cardiac surgeries. He has the best patient survival rate in the state. Today, he was prevented from saving a life because of the color of his skin. This is not just an attack on Dr. Washington. It's an attack on the entire medical profession. The press conference was interrupted by breaking news. Barbara Morrison was holding her own conference, standing next to a photo of her late husband. "My Harold was a good man," she said through tears. "He taught high school history for 35 years. He believed in justice, in equality, in the American dream. He would be alive right now if that officer had just let Dr. Washington do his job. But Officer Patterson saw a black man and assumed he was a criminal. His racism, his prejudice, his hatred, that's what killed my husband." She then dropped a bombshell. "I'm filing a wrongful death lawsuit against Officer Patterson and the police department for $25 million. But I want everyone to know this isn't about money. This is about justice. This is about making sure no other family goes through what I'm going through." The videos had now been viewed over 10 million times. Celebrities were sharing them, politicians were commenting, and medical professionals worldwide were expressing outrage. The hashtag Justice for Harold was trending globally. Patterson, meanwhile, had gone home to find media vans outside his house. His wife, Janet, met him at the door, her face a mask of fury and shame. "The whole neighborhood has seen the videos," she said. "Our daughter called from college crying. She says everyone knows her father is the racist cop who killed someone. How could you do this, Daniel? How could you?" "I was doing my job," Patterson said weakly. "Your job?" Janet's voice rose. "Your job was to tase a doctor saving someone's life? Your job was to let a man die because you couldn't stand to see a successful black man? I've ignored your comments over the years, your jokes about black people, but this is murder, Daniel." That night, Patterson couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Harold Morrison's face, saw Dr. Washington's desperate attempts to save him, heard Barbara Morrison's screams. He went to his computer and made the mistake of Googling his name. The results were devastating. His face was everywhere, attached to headlines like "Racist Cop Causes Death," "The Officer Who Killed Harold Morrison," and "When Prejudice Kills, the Daniel Patterson Story." His Facebook page, which he thought was private, had been screenshotted and shared, showing years of racist posts and Blue Lives Matter propaganda mixed with barely veiled white supremacist content. The next morning, Patterson's union representative, Tom Bradley, came to his house with bad news. "The union's not going to defend you, Daniel," Tom said bluntly. "The video's too damning. You tased a doctor performing CPR. The man died. There's no defending that." "But I've paid dues for 23 years, Patterson protested. "And in one moment you undid all of that," Tom replied. "The union has to think about all its members, not just you. Defending you would taint everyone. You're on your own." Within 48 hours, the district attorney announced criminal charges. Patterson was arrested at his home, in front of the same media cameras that had been camping out there. The image of him being led away in handcuffs, the same cuffs he had put on Dr. Washington, became iconic. The bail hearing was a circus. The prosecutor, ADA Michelle Chang, argued that Patterson was a danger to the community. "This officer has shown that he will use violence against black citizens even when they're trying to save lives," she argued. "How can any black person in this city feel safe with him free?" Patterson's public defender, no private attorney would take the case, argued for reasonable bail, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. "Officer Patterson," Judge Elizabeth Chen said, "you caused a man's death through your prejudiced actions." Bail is set at $500,000. Patterson's face crumpled. He didn't have that kind of money. His house was mortgaged, his savings minimal after putting 2 kids through college. He would have to stay in jail until his family could figure something out. In jail, Patterson discovered what happened to cops inside. He needed protective custody immediately, as other inmates made it clear what they thought of a racist cop who had caused a death. The guards, many of whom were black, treated him with cold professionalism at best, open contempt at worst. Dr. Washington, meanwhile, had become a reluctant celebrity. He appeared on every major news network, telling Harold Morrison's story and advocating for change. "This isn't about me," he said on CNN. "This is about Harold Morrison, who should be alive. This is about every black medical professional who's been questioned, doubted, or prevented from doing their job because of their skin color. This is about systemic racism that values prejudice over human life." The medical examiner's report was released a week later, and it was damning for Patterson. It confirmed that Harold Morrison would have had an 85% chance of survival if CPR had been continued and the AED had been used. The report explicitly stated, "The interruption of cardiopulmonary resuscitation directly contributed to the patient's death." Patterson's lawyer tried to argue that Harold might have died anyway, but the medical evidence was overwhelming. 5 independent cardiologists reviewed the case and all agreed. Harold Morrison should have survived. The discovery phase of the civil lawsuit revealed even more damaging information about Patterson. His personnel file was a chronicle of racist behavior spanning 2 decades. There were complaints he had planted evidence on black suspects, used excessive force during arrests of minorities, and made racist comments during traffic stops. All had been dismissed or resulted in minimal disciplinary action. Dr. Washington's legal team also discovered Patterson was part of a Facebook group called Warriors for Justice, a thinly veiled white supremacist group for law enforcement officers. The posts there were shocking, with Patterson actively participating in discussions about protecting white neighborhoods and dealing with the urban problem. Patterson's family began to fracture under the pressure. His son, Daniel Jr., a senior in college, publicly disowned him in a viral Twitter thread. "The man in those videos isn't my father," he wrote. "My father died the moment he chose racism over human life." Harold Morrison was someone's father, someone's grandfather. He's dead because of hatred. I'm ashamed to share DNA with his killer. His daughter, Sarah, a nursing student, was even more devastating in her condemnation. She wrote an op-ed for her college newspaper that was picked up nationally. "I became a nurse to save lives," she wrote. "I thought I was following in my father's footsteps, protecting and serving. Now I know my father is everything I stand against. He prevented medical care from being delivered because of racism. In my profession, that's the ultimate sin. Harold Morrison haunts me. I see his face when I practice CPR on dummies. I think about how Dr. Washington must feel, knowing he could have saved him. My father didn't just kill Harold Morrison, he killed our family." Janet Patterson filed for divorce 2 weeks after the arrest. In her filing, she revealed years of racist behavior she had tried to ignore or excuse. "I told myself he was just stressed from the job," she wrote in her statement. "I made excuses when he would rant about those people ruining the neighborhood. I looked the other way when he would come home bragging about arresting black men for minor infractions. I was complicit in my silence, but watching him cause a man's death because he couldn't tolerate a black doctor saving a white patient, I can't be married to that monster anymore." The criminal trial was set for 3 months later, but the court of public opinion had already convicted Patterson. His name had become synonymous with racist policing. Law schools were already using the Patterson case as an example of how prejudice in law enforcement could lead to death. The criminal trial of Officer Daniel Patterson began on a cold Monday morning in January, 3 months after Harold Morrison's death. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters holding signs reading "Justice for Harold" and "Racism Kills." Media from around the world had descended on the city to cover what was being called the trial of the century, a case that would define how America dealt with racist police officers who caused deaths through their prejudice. Inside the courtroom, the contrast between the two sides was stark. The prosecution table was filled with top attorneys, led by ADA Michelle Chang and supported by the State Attorney General's office. Dr. Washington sat in the gallery's front row, dignified in a dark suit, surrounded by his colleagues from the medical community. Barbara Morrison sat across the aisle, dressed in black, holding a photo of Harold. At the defense table, Patterson looked like a ghost of his former self. He had lost 30 pounds in jail, his hair had gone completely gray, and his eyes had the hollow look of a man who knew he was finished. His public defender, Sandra Williams, looked overwhelmed by the case she had been assigned. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. A D.A. Chang walked the jury through the video frame by frame, showing Dr. Washington identifying himself as a doctor, showing him performing perfect CPR, showing Patterson ignoring Barbara Morrison's pleas, and finally showing the taser deployment that ended Harold Morrison's last chance at life. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chang said, "this is not a complicated case." Officer Patterson saw a black man and assumed he was a criminal. His racism was so profound that he couldn't process the possibility that this black man was a doctor. That racism directly caused Harold Morrison's death. This is involuntary manslaughter, pure and simple. The defense's opening was weak, trying to argue that Patterson believed he was protecting Harold from an assault. But even as Sandra Williams spoke the words, she seemed to know how hollow they sounded. The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Washington himself. For 2 hours, he walked the jury through every medical decision, every second of the attempted resuscitation. "Mr. Morrison was in ventricular fibrillation, Doctor," Washington explained. "It's a rhythm that responds well to defibrillation if caught quickly. I had perhaps a 5-minute window to save him. I had completed 2 rounds of CPR and was about to attach the AED when Officer Patterson intervened." Every second of delay decreased Mr. Morrison's chances by 10%. When Officer Patterson tased me, he signed Mr. Morrison's death warrant. On cross-examination, the defense tried to argue that Dr. Washington hadn't properly identified himself, but the doctor remained calm and factual. "I identified myself as a doctor 3 times, he said. "I was wearing my medical conference badge. I was performing textbook CPR that any trained officer should recognize. Officer Patterson didn't see a doctor because he couldn't see past my skin color." The next witness was Barbara Morrison. Her testimony left not a dry eye in the courtroom. "Harold and I were married for 42 years, she said, her voice breaking. "We had 3 children, 7 grandchildren. We were supposed to grow old together. That Tuesday, we were shopping for our grandson's birthday present when Harold collapsed. When Dr. Washington appeared, I thought God had sent an angel. He was so confident, so competent. Harold was going to be okay. Then Officer Patterson arrived, and my world ended." She looked directly at Patterson. "You didn't just kill my husband. You killed the grandfather who was going to teach our grandson to play baseball. You killed the man who volunteered at the literacy center every Saturday. You killed the teacher who had inspired thousands of students over 35 years, all because you couldn't stand to see a black man in a position of authority and expertise. The prosecution then called a series of medical experts, each confirming that Harold Morrison would have survived with continued CPR and AED use. Dr. Jennifer Park, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Johns Hopkins, was particularly damning. In my professional opinion, Officer Patterson's intervention was the proximate cause of Mr. Morrison's death, she testified. The window for successful resuscitation was narrow but achievable. Dr. Washington's technique was flawless. If he had been allowed to continue, Mr. Morrison would have had an 85% chance of survival with good neurological outcome. The most shocking testimony came from Officer Patricia Chen, Patterson's former partner, who had agreed to testify for the prosecution in exchange for immunity. Officer Patterson had a name for black professionals, she testified, looking ashamed. He called them pretenders. He believed they had gotten their positions through affirmative action, not merit. He once told me that every successful black person was either a criminal who hadn't been caught or a diversity hire. I should have reported him years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. She then revealed something that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Officer Patterson kept a notebook in his patrol car where he tracked what he called suspicious blacks in white neighborhoods. He had photos, addresses, license plates. He called it his hunting journal. The prosecution produced the journal, showing pages of surveillance notes on black doctors, lawyers, business people, anyone Patterson deemed didn't belong. Dr. Washington's name was in there from a year earlier when Patterson had seen him at another medical emergency but had been prevented from intervening by a supervisor. The defense's case was pathetic in comparison. They called character witnesses who described Patterson as a dedicated officer, but on cross-examination, each admitted they had heard him make racist comments. They brought in a use-of-force expert who tried to justify the tasing, but he crumbled under cross-examination when forced to admit that tasing someone providing medical care was never acceptable. Patterson himself took the stand against his lawyer's advice. It was a disaster. I thought I was protecting Mr. Morrison, he said unconvincingly. From what? Ada Chang asked. From life-saving medical care? I didn't know he was a real doctor. Why not? He told you repeatedly. He was performing CPR correctly. He was wearing a conference badge. What made you doubt him? Patterson couldn't answer without admitting his racism. The silence stretched on for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Officer Patterson, Chang continued, isn't it true that you couldn't believe, Doctor? Washington was a doctor because he's black? That's not... I don't see color, Patterson stammered. Chang then read from Patterson's Facebook posts, his hunting journal, and 38 complaints from black citizens. By the end, Patterson was sweating, stuttering, and had essentially confessed to a pattern of racist behavior spanning decades. The jury deliberated for exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes. When they returned, the foreman's voice was clear and unwavering. Guilty on all counts. Patterson collapsed in his chair as the verdicts were read. Guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. Guilty of violation of civil rights. Guilty of criminal negligence resulting in death. Judge Elizabeth Chen scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Patterson was remanded to custody, his bail revoked. As he was led away in shackles, he passed Dr. Washington. I hope you're happy, Patterson spat. No, Officer Patterson, Doctor. Washington replied sadly. Harold Morrison is still dead. There's no happiness in that. 2 weeks later, the sentencing hearing was standing room only. Victim impact statements were read from Harold's children, his grandchildren, his former students. Each one described a man who had dedicated his life to education and equality, killed by someone who represented everything he stood against. Dr. Washington gave his own impact statement. "I've saved 523 lives in my career." Harold Morrison would have been 524. Instead, he became the one patient I'll never forget. The one I couldn't save not because of medical limitations, but because of racism. Officer Patterson didn't just take Harold's life. He stole a piece of my soul. Every time I perform CPR now, I see Harold's face. I hear Barbara's screams. I feel the taser hitting my back. Judge Chen's sentencing statement was scathing. "Officer Patterson, you took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, your racism caused an innocent man's death. You prevented a hero doctor from saving a life because you couldn't see past skin color. Harold Morrison is dead because of your prejudice. Dr. Washington lives with trauma because of your actions. The community has lost faith in law enforcement because of officers like you. The sentence: 12 years in state prison, no possibility of parole for 8 years. Patterson would also pay restitution to both the Morrison family and doctor. Washington, be permanently barred from law enforcement and be registered as a hate crime offender." But the criminal trial was just the beginning. The civil trials were even more devastating. Barbara Morrison's wrongful death suit went to trial 6 months later. Her legal team presented economic experts who calculated Harold's lost retirement years, his contributions to his family, his volunteer work value. They presented psychological experts who testified about Barbara's trauma, depression, and PTSD. The jury awarded her $35 million, $10 million more than she had asked for. Dr. Washington's civil trial was even more dramatic. His legal team didn't just focus on the assault and false arrest. They presented evidence of the profound impact on his life and career. 3 patients had requested different surgeons after seeing the arrest video. He had developed PTSD, requiring therapy and medication. He had nightmares about Harold Morrison. His malpractice insurance had skyrocketed even though he had done nothing wrong. Dr. Washington is one of the finest cardiac surgeons in the world. His attorney, David Lieberman, argued, "Officer Patterson's racism didn't just assault him physically, it assaulted his very identity as a healer. How do you put a price on that trauma? How do you compensate for the guilt of not being able to save someone because of racism?" The jury's verdict was stunning. $75 million in compensatory and punitive damages, the largest civil rights settlement in state history. Patterson, watching from prison, realized he would be paying for the rest of his life. The court ordered wage garnishment of 75% of any income forever. He would never own property again, never have a free bank account, never escape the financial consequences. In prison, Patterson discovered what happened to racist ex-cops. He needed protective custody 24/7, spending 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Other inmates had made it clear what would happen if they got to him. He received daily death threats. Photos of Harold Morrison were slipped under his cell door. Guards, many of whom were black, treated him with open contempt. 5 years into his sentence, Patterson was stabbed by another inmate whose brother had been one of Patterson's victims years earlier. He survived but lost the use of his left arm, ending any hope of physical work after prison. His ex-wife Janet remarried and moved across the country. His children legally changed their last names. His son became a civil rights attorney specifically to fight against police racism. His daughter became a nurse and volunteered at free clinics in black communities, trying to atone for her father's sins. Patterson gave one interview from prison 7 years into his sentence. He looked destroyed, aged 30 years and 7, white-haired, gaunt, hollow-eyed. I think about Harold Morrison every day, he said. I see his face when I close my eyes. I hear Doctor, Washington begging me to let him save him. I replay that moment over and over, knowing that my racism killed an innocent man. I destroyed so many lives, including my own, because I couldn't see past skin color. Dr. Washington, meanwhile, used his settlement to create the Harold Morrison Foundation for Emergency Medical Access. The foundation provided legal protection for medical professionals providing emergency care, trained civilians in CPR, and most importantly, worked to eliminate racial barriers in emergency medicine. He also became the Surgeon General of the United States, where he implemented nationwide protocols protecting medical professionals from interference during emergencies. The Morrison Protocol made it a federal crime to prevent medical care based on the provider's race. 10 years after Harold's death, a memorial was unveiled at Riverside Plaza. The plaque read, "In memory of Harold Morrison, beloved teacher, husband, and grandfather, whose preventable death reminds us that racism kills and that every second counts in saving a life. May his memory inspire us to see beyond prejudice and to value every human life equally." Patterson was released after serving 10 of his 12 years. But freedom was worse than prison. No one would hire him. No one would rent to him. He lived in a halfway house, working minimum wage when he could find work, with most earnings going to his victims. He died alone 3 years later, found in his tiny apartment days after a heart attack. Ironically, the same condition that had killed Harold Morrison. At Patterson's sparsely attended funeral, Doctor Washington sent flowers with a note. "Every life has value. Harold Morrison's, yours, may you find in death the peace that your hatred denied you in life." And that's how one racist cop's decision to arrest a black doctor saving a life led to a death, a $75 million lawsuit, 12 years in prison, and complete destruction. Sometimes karma comes in the form of a doctor trying to save a life. And sometimes justice demands everything from those who value prejudice over human existence.